You are the only kind of human alive right now. Think about that for a second. One species. 8 billion of us, spread across every continent, but all the same kind. Same brain size, roughly. Same hands, same basic wiring. We've made it to every corner of this planet, and we got here alone. No competition, no other version of us walking around somewhere that we have to worry about. That wasn't always true. For most of our existence on this planet, we shared it. With Neanderthals, with Denisovans, with Homo erectus. Multiple versions of human, all alive at the same time, all walking around on the same Earth. And then, one by one, they disappeared, until only we were left. But here's the thing. One of those other humans was so strange, so far outside anything scientists expected, that when we finally found them, a lot of people refused to believe they were real. 3.5 feet tall, a brain the size of a grapefruit, living on a remote island in the middle of the sea, hunting creatures twice their size, crafting tools sharp enough to slice through bone. And they were doing all of this while modern humans like us already walked the Earth. This is the story of Homo floresiensis, the species the world nicknamed the Hobbit. And the deeper you go into this story, the stranger it gets. Let's start with the discovery, because the discovery itself is already wild. It's September 2003. A joint team of Indonesian and Australian archaeologists is working inside a cave on the island of Flores, Indonesia. The cave is called Liang Bua, which in the local language means, roughly, cool cave. It's a spacious cave, well known. People had dug there before, decades earlier, without finding anything that changed the textbooks. This time, about 6 meters down into the sediment, they hit something. A skull. Small, almost perfectly preserved, which almost never happens with bones this old. The team's first instinct is that it belongs to a child. The skull is too small for an adult. But then they excavate the rest of the skeleton, and the rest of the skeleton tells a different story. Fully erupted wisdom teeth. A pelvis shaped for walking upright. Bone density consistent with a mature adult. This was not a child. This was a grown adult who stood roughly 1 meter tall and weighed somewhere around 25 kilograms. That's the size of an average 7-year-old today. The specimen gets labeled LB1. The team quietly starts calling her Flo, and within months of the paper being published, the arguments begin. Here's what made the discovery so hard to accept. LB1's brain volume was approximately 380 cubic centimeters. Modern humans average around 1,350. Even Homo erectus, our thick-browed ancient ancestor, managed somewhere around 900. LB1's brain was closer in size to a chimpanzee's than to anything we'd previously called human. A brain that small, by every model scientists had, should not be capable of much. Certainly not tool-making, certainly not coordinated hunting. Except in the same cave, right alongside those bones, there were stone tools. Not rough, accidental-looking rocks that you could maybe explain away. Deliberately shaped blades, flake tools designed for cutting, scraping, processing meat, evidence of controlled fire. And scattered across the floor, butchered bones of stegodon. A species of miniature elephant that also lived on Flores at the time, and that was significantly bigger than the humans hunting it. Small-brained, meter-tall hominins were organizing hunts against animals many times their weight. Something about that brain was working harder than anyone expected. Later analysis found traces of Komodo dragon bones in the same layers. They weren't just hunting elephants, they were apparently dealing with Komodo dragons too, which, if you've ever seen one in person, you would absolutely not want to do. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange. If you accept that Homo floresiensis evolved on Flores through island dwarfism, the well-documented process where large animals isolated on islands shrink over generations because of limited food and space, you still have a serious problem to solve. Flores has never been connected to mainland Asia. Not during the ice ages, not even when sea levels dropped significantly and land bridges appeared elsewhere. Between Flores and the nearest landmass, there has always been a stretch of open ocean. Not a massive stretch, but enough. Most land mammals never made it across. That's why Flores has such an unusual ecosystem. Things that could fly or float arrived, most other things didn't. So how did any hominin ancestor of Homo floresiensis get there in the first place? The most accepted theory is that they descended from Homo erectus, who may have reached Flores approximately 1 million years ago. Maybe by accident, a group swept out to sea on debris after a storm or a tsunami, carried by current to an island they'd never seen. Maybe intentionally using some form of primitive watercraft we have no record of. Once isolated over hundreds of thousands of years, the population shrank. But here's the wild theory. And this one is not mainstream, but serious researchers have actually raised it. The wrist bones of LB1 are more primitive than what you'd expect from a descendant of Homo erectus. The shoulder structure is strange. The feet are disproportionately large in a way that looks more ancient than modern. Some researchers have argued that Homo floresiensis might not descend from Homo erectus at all, but from something older, Homo habilis, a species we thought stayed in Africa 2 million years ago. Or possibly even something close to Australopithecus. If that's true, Homo floresiensis isn't just a shrunken version of a known species, it's a surviving branch of a lineage we thought died out on a completely different continent, millions of years earlier. Somehow still alive on an island in the Indonesian archipelago, making tools, hunting elephants, building fires long after their relatives elsewhere were gone. That is not a footnote, that is a completely different story about who we are and where we came from. There's another layer here that science spent years fighting about. Shortly after LB1 was published, a group of researchers pushed back hard. Their argument, Flo wasn't a new species. She was a modern human with microcephaly, a medical condition that causes the skull and brain to develop abnormally small. The size was pathology, not species. They were not looking at an ancient hominin, they were looking at a sick person. The debate became one of the ugliest in modern paleoanthropology. At one point, the original research team returned to the storage facility in Jakarta, where the bones were kept, to find that specimens had been removed, borrowed without permission, and returned damaged. The pelvis was broken, the femur cracked, an irreplaceable, one-of-a-kind fossil, damaged while a dispute about its very identity was still ongoing. It took years to settle. In 2016, a comprehensive study examined LB1's wrist bones, teeth, inner ear anatomy, and foot structure against every hominin species on record. The conclusion was definitive. The features were too consistent, too systematically different from anything in our lineage, and present in multiple individuals found at the same site to be explained by disease. Homo floresiensis was a real distinct species, not a sick modern human, not a deformed child, a separate branch of the human family tree, unlike anything previously known. She was real. They were real. Now here is the part of this story that most people haven't heard. Flores has a legend. An old one passed down through generations of local people long before any archaeologist showed up with a trowel. The legend is about small cave-dwelling creatures called the Ebu Gogo. The name translates roughly to grandmother who eats everything. In the stories, they were short and hairy. They mumbled in a language nobody could understand. They stole food from village gardens, and they lived in caves somewhere deep in the forest interior. Some versions of the story describe encounters as recently as a few hundred years ago. Scientifically, the last solid evidence of Homo floresiensis puts their extinction at around 50,000 years ago, likely wiped out by a major volcanic eruption on Flores, or possibly by the arrival of modern humans pushing into the region. That's tens of thousands of years before these legends could have formed, if the timeline is right. But the dates are based entirely on what we've found in one cave. Flores is a large island, heavily forested and not fully excavated. The absence of evidence from other sites is not the same as evidence of absence. Some researchers have noted that the dating at Liangbua has been revised before. Some argue that small, isolated populations of Homo floresiensis could have survived in remote parts of the island far longer than the fossils currently suggest. Long enough to be seen. Long enough to become something people told stories about around fires at night. Nobody is claiming that's definitely what happened, but it hasn't been disproven either, and that gap, the space between what the bones tell us and what the legends describe, is one of the more unsettling open questions in all of human prehistory. Here's what the Hobbit actually means. For a long time, the model of human evolution was essentially a clean line. Species lead to species, the older ones disappear, and eventually you arrive at modern humans. Smarter, bigger, dominant. Progress moving forward in one direction. Homo floresiensis breaks that model completely. They were not in the line. They were a branch. A branch that went somewhere completely different, smaller, stranger, uniquely adapted to a world that no one predicted they would ever reach. And they survived there, For hundreds of thousands of years on a remote island using tools we still don't fully understand, hunting animals we wouldn't want to face, and possibly existing at the same time as modern humans expanding across Southeast Asia. We don't know if that meeting ever happened. We don't know if there was conflict or avoidance or something else entirely. We have no record of what modern humans and hobbits made of each other if their paths ever crossed. We may never have one, but here's what stays with me about all of this. We act like being human is a fixed thing. One shape, one brain size, one way of being. We've been alone long enough that it starts to feel like the natural state, like we were always the only ones. Homo floresiensis is the proof that we weren't, that for most of the time something called human has existed on this planet, there were other versions of it, other minds, other ways of solving the same problem of being alive. Different bodies, different islands, different tools, but the same basic drive to hunt, to build, to survive the next season. One of those versions ended up on a small island in Indonesia, 3.5 feet tall, with a brain the size of a fist, managing to outlast almost everything else that had ever walked this earth. They didn't make it forever. But then again, neither have most things that tried. The cave where they were found is still there. Still cool and quiet and dark inside, just like the name says. And somewhere under 6 meters of ash and sediment, the rest of their story is still waiting. We've barely started looking.